Hey, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight in the first ever Facebook Live Town Hall Forum. So this is a first for us in the National Guard. So we originally had planned to start hosting town halls quarterly to share some information on your National Guard. But with COVID-19, obviously a lot of that's changed. So that being said, we're going to move to the virtual format until things change up, hopefully down the road, and we'll actually be able to meet in person again. So I've received a number of questions, folks using the QR code. So I'm not scripting it, but I've at least got some notes here that I can refer to. But I'm looking forward to some of the live questions as they come in. So joining with me today, I've got Brigadier General Dave Manfredi. To my right, he's the director of our Joint Staff. Thank you for being here, Dave.
Thanks, Greg. Evening, everybody.
And Colonel Dave Shevchik, who's our 158th Fighter Wing Commander, and he's also an F-35 pilot. So we're going to continue doing this in the future, so this will not be a one and only. If the need is there and the interest, we look forward to your questions. We want to talk about the Guard and answer any questions that you may have. So anticipate this quarterly. Looking forward to that discussion. And behind the camera, there's a lot of folks it takes to set this up. I've got my public affairs team and some subject matter experts because we may not have the answer to your question. If it's not something we can answer tonight, we'll certainly get an answer to you at a later date once we do a little research for you. So it's been busy. There's a lot going on in the Guard in my tenure here thus far in the past 15 months, and in that is a lot of organizational change. So looking at the wing, in September we'll have received our 20th and final aircraft. And continue to work towards our operational status, hopefully by the end of 21. And we can expect then, in 2021, to receive a noise study on F-35 sound in Vermont, which is measured against what was detailed in the environmental impact statement. And Colonel Shevchik will talk a little bit more about that. I think I've got some questions queued up that came in earlier. The Vermont Air National Guard trains, so we'll train with the F-35 normally Tuesday through Friday. We'll fly one weekend a month for drill weekends and then one Sunday per quarter. Normally those aircraft will fly mid-morning and again mid-afternoon. And Colonel Shevchik again will talk a little bit about that flight schedule and the rationale behind it. So I did get some questions and some concerns from legislators and some folks in southern Vermont about aircraft noise that they're hearing. It's not our F-35s. We did a little research through our public affairs shop. They reached out to Massachusetts, and it turns out those are F-15s that fly out of Barnes. So we're going to continue working with our partner state and see what we can do to help mitigate that noise. We don't own the airspace, the FAA does, but we'll work to mitigate that as best we can. So the Army National Guard remains busy as well. We've got an annual training coming up here this late summer. We'll be going out to the Pacific, which is a real change of pace for us. It's a great opportunity for our soldiers. It gets us out of the local training area, and they get to do something vastly different than we've done in the past. And in conjunction with that, we're preparing for our deployments in the winter and spring of 21. So I mentioned a few months ago when this first came up, we have a notification of sourcing. So what that means for the Army is that resources have been turned on for us to prepare for deployment. That could be training, it could be equipment, other resources that are needed to get us into our respective theaters of operation. What we don't have and what's been delayed, likely by COVID as impacted on many things, is the release of an alert order. And an alert order is the next step to a deployment. And that gives us planning guidance and execution guidance on how we do that mission. So to that end, we're going to continue planning. Nothing's changed as to the location. So it will not be the entire Vermont National Guard going. We'll have about 1,000 Vermonters going. And the construct will be as company-sized, detachment-sized, so smaller units, and battalion task forces. And they'll be task organized to fit the mission that they'll be receiving. and we'll be going to Africa Command, Central Command, and European Command to execute those missions. So again, we're going to continue training locally. So COVID put a bite in that too. We were delayed by a couple of months with a lot of our training plans. So in order to kind of get caught up, we're doing a lot more training locally at Camp Ethan training site, and that does a couple things for us. So we'll get the collective training, the unit training that we'll do locally, but by doing it locally, that protects our force and keeps us from traveling to perhaps locations in the United States that are more hard hit by COVID, and by extension, it protects our families. So the key thing here is to get our training done while protecting our force and retaining a response capability in case we're needed. So that's the direction we're going with collective training, at least locally. So the other thing we've done, we've initiated the first of 3 town halls. We've done one already at the Regional Training Institute here at Camp Johnson. We got one upcoming at the Fighter Wing, and another one at our Regional Readiness Training Center down in Northfield. And the topic is racial injustice. It's a topic that I think we need to discuss. Our senior leaders are all in agreement. We want to know perspectives. We want to hear what our soldiers and airmen are experiencing, what they're feeling, and what their thoughts are on it. I don't know that there's an end state. I don't think this has to be a single time that we do this. I think it's an ongoing conversation. So that's important for us as an organization. It's important for us to understand other folks' perspectives and how to best support one another. But I have to give credit where credit's due. That wasn't my idea, and it wasn't a senior leader's idea. What I think is great about it, to me, good ideas don't have a rank. It was Tech Sergeant Addison from the Air Guard who came up with this idea. So hats off to him for having that thought and bringing it up to senior leaders and making this a reality. So good work. Keep it up. So in response to COVID-19, you've been following the news. The Vermont Guard's been very busy. So we've been, gosh, at this point we're probably well over 2 million meals distributed in conjunction with the Vermont Food Bank across Vermont to Vermonters in need. We'll continue doing that. We're off of that mission this week. We'll pick it up again next week. We'll continue doing that so long as the need is there. We continue testing. Our medical company and our 15th Civil Support Team, they're supporting the Department of Health in doing pop-up testing sites. So as of today, we're over 8,000 tests administered in support of feeding that data to the Department of Health and better tailor our response to COVID-19 and keeping Vermonters safe. We've got airmen from the wing working at the Strategic National Stockpile Warehouse, working with FEMA to make sure that needed equipment is categorized and inventoried and gotten out very quickly to the places it needs to go. So it's been great. I think one of the most important things that we did, and most notable, especially as a small state, we built an alternate care facility at the Essex Fairgrounds, a 400-bed alternate care facility. And that was planning ahead, not knowing the direction that COVID was going to take. We've been very fortunate that it didn't go the direction that was the worst forecast for us. But as our Air Guard civil engineers and our Army band and other members from the Air and Army National Guard, different units, from design to build to operational use was 7 days. So that to me is just remarkable. And the efficiency with which those airmen and soldiers did it is what really sets Vermont apart from the rest of the United States. They did that in 7 days at a cost of about $235,000. So that's remarkable. So that really impresses me with the depth of experience, the resilience, and kind of the mission focus that our airmen and our soldiers bring to our communities and to our state. So great job by those folks for doing that. And we'll continue to support the response to COVID so long as we're needed. That's our first mission. It remains central to what we do. That's why a lot of us joined the Guard. We want to serve our communities and our state, and as exemplified by recent activity, that's exactly what we're doing. And before we get to some of the questions, what I'd like to do is highlight a recent legislative accomplishment by the Guard. We've established a Provost Marshal position and a Deputy Provost Marshal in the Vermont National Guard. So those will be 2 certified law enforcement officers focused on guard activity. They will function as a liaison with civil law enforcement authority, which is a niche we don't currently have. So if the governor signed that today, and I believe that he did, that will become law tomorrow, and we will have a field grade officer, a major or above, as a certified officer, and a senior non-commissioned officer. And these positions are either Air or Army, ideally one of each. But that, again, focuses on liaison with civil authority. It provides us, in essence, a compliance team. It helps us do background checks on soldiers and airmen. We have a terminal here. They'll be trained to do that. And depending on the degree of complexity, it will help us do investigations if there's a nexus with civil law enforcement, and more effectively achieve closure in some instances, in particular in the area of sexual assault. So we want to eliminate it from the organization, and that's what this position will help us do. So anyway, I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think this is a great format. Let's see how it goes, and let's start taking some questions. What am I most proud of since taking this job? Well, there comes a point, I think, in a career, certainly in the military, where it becomes less about you and more about the organization. So what I'm most proud of is, I think, the soldiers and airmen and what they do for Vermont and what they do in support of their federal mission. I think it's pretty profound to watch what they do, and if you get to know your Guard, you'll see the depth of experience and professionalism that we bring. That's probably what I'm most proud of. They've embraced change, they're looking forward, and all of that's with the end state of making the organization better. That's where I am with that one. Are there plans to install a sound monitoring system at the airport? Well, like I said, it's part of the environmental impact study, and I'll defer to Colonel Shevchik. He can probably answer in a little more detail than I can.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Good evening, everybody. There are two key upcoming noise studies, both to be completed in 2021, that are going to provide some important data. And I'd like to just highlight those and go over those real quickly to give everybody an overview. Those two key upcoming noise studies. The first is one that's actually taking place out west at some U.S. Navy installations. There's some noise monitoring going on at two fighter bases, one of which is an F-35 installation. That's Naval Air Station Lemoore in California. And the reason this is important and significant is the monitoring is intended to validate the DoD computer modeling against real-world acoustic data. This is going to take place over a year, over all 4 seasons, and essentially we should have that data by the end of sometime next year, and that's important for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to tell us if the same modeling used here in Vermont, is accurate, and then also it's important because that'll be about a year after we've had our full complement of F-35s to do an efficient, effective noise study. The second of those two key upcoming noise studies is the requirement, as outlined in the environmental impact statement, as the Adjutant General mentioned, for a follow-on noise study here at Burlington. And that's a requirement as part of the mitigation and monitoring plan within the EIS. And we've confirmed with the National Guard Bureau that is planned, that is funding, and that will happen. So between those two important noise studies, I think we'll be provided some good information that we can go ahead and share with everybody. Thanks for the question, sir.
So next question, can you talk about the pending deployments for the next year? How long will a soldier be expected to be away from work? Is the whole state going, and when are soldiers leaving? General Manfredi, I'll defer to you for this one. I
Okay.
said what I said at the opening. You may have a little more detail that you can share with everybody.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. Good evening, everyone. We have, beginning in the winter and into the spring of 2021, units of the Vermont Army National Guard deploying to the 3 areas of responsibility that General Knight talked about earlier in his opening statement. That's the U.S. European Command, U.S. Africa Command, and U.S. Central Command. They'll be deploying in anywhere from a very small detachment-sized element up to battalion task forces, and even a brigade headquarters will be deploying as well. Our employers and our families should expect that their soldiers will be deployed for approximately 12 months, which is the standard deployment time inclusive of post-mobilization training at the MOB station, and demobilization time at the MOB station as well. The whole state will not be deploying. We anticipate somewhere around 1,000 soldiers deploying, which will leave us plenty of support back here to work rear detachment operations and to also be there in case of any need that should come up in support of our community during that period of time. I think that covered all of them. Did I miss anything, Greg?
Winter soldiers leaving.
Soldiers will be leaving winter into the spring of 2021.
Okay, what kind of resources are available for families of service members deploying? Well, I will tell you, it's not only when they're deploying. We have a very robust family programs here in the Vermont National Guard, and I would argue that's probably one of the best in the nation. So they have a lot of resources available to them, not only within the Vermont Guard, but also can facilitate outside agencies to help resolve issues as they come up with families and guardsmen. And they're engaged now even with the response in COVID-19 and helping folks who are feeling the pinch that comes with this pandemic. But when they deploy, so we're going to have a very robust rear detachment. So with that, and part of their duties is, one, to facilitate continued training with soldiers that have remained here who didn't deploy, because we need to continue to train and maintain our readiness. But that's also to take care of families of soldiers. It can be stressful, and a lot of things can happen during deployment, and sometimes folks aren't here to help, and that's what we're here for. And that rear detachment command is part of that solution to help those families get the assistance they need when they need it, whether that's via family programs or something that we can do internally to the unit as families and working together to take care of that. Anything else you want to add?
Sure. If I could add, with the family programs, General Knight talked about how good our family programs is. As a testament to that, that program has been accredited twice. The second time, when it went through accreditation within the last year, the accreditation team looked at their initial submission packet. It was so good that they didn't actually have to come in and do the formal visit. So we do have a truly good team, a lot of experience there, and they've done great things for our families in the past on a day-to-day basis as well as during deployments, and that's both for the Air and the Army. In addition to the family programs and the rear detachments, each of our units that will be deploying have a family readiness group. That family readiness group, just like our soldiers, goes through training, does a lot of preparation so that those families of deployed soldiers have the support that's available. The phone trees are in place, so communication is constant. So from family programs through rear detachments to our family programs that are in place, I think our families will be very well supported throughout the deployment.
Thanks, Dave. So a Facebook Live question: are the F-35s studied by the Navy for noise identical to the ones used here in Vermont?
Absolutely, sir. I'll take that one. Actually, I just found that out because initially we just heard that there were 2 bases out west. Doing more research, we found out that one of those bases was Naval Air Station Lemoore in California, and the other one is Whidbey Island. And actually, the jets that the Navy flies, the F-35 there at Navy Lemoore, is the F-35C. So same jet, different variant. So hopefully that answers that question.
Okay. Is BLC going to continue the online format for FY20, FY21, so next year, or is it going to be a resident course? So those of you who aren't familiar with Army acronyms, BLC is the basic leader course. That's the first professional military education that a soldier goes through to become a non-commissioned officer. So in essence, an E4 or a specialist to becoming a sergeant. Short answer is we don't know. It's all dependent on what happens in the direction of COVID, and we have to kind of straddle the line between DoD policy on travel and what our governor's guidelines are. In the end, we'll continue to train soldiers either in resident or virtually. Historically, we've done it in resident here at our Regional Training Institute. We train about 500 soldiers from across the U.S. Every year. So obviously that format's changed and adapted to become virtual until we get on the backside of COVID. So short answer is we don't know. but we'll continue training in whatever format we have to make sure that our soldiers get their education.
If I could add a very quick comment to that, please, Greg. So the first virtual BLC course was conducted last month. Very positive feedback from both the students and the cadre who taught the class. Some idiosyncrasies associated with doing things virtual, particularly when it comes to some of the hands-on tasks, like learning how to march soldiers and things like that. But I feel very confident that the quality of the instruction that our soldiers are getting in those BLC classes is very high and as good as it was during any live classes that were conducted.
Outstanding. Thanks, Dave. Can we get a flyover of F-35 for the Buffalo Bills home opener? There are Vermonters cheering in the stands too. Colonel Shevchik.
Sir, I don't know, is that one in Foxborough, or we'll have to talk about that one, I guess. I appreciate the question. You know, we try to support all kind of events, especially in our community, both locally, regionally, nationally, especially flyovers, much like the America Strong initiative flyover that we did several weeks back. We appreciate the local hospital leaders putting in that request and that support so that we could pay tribute to our healthcare professionals. So greatly appreciate that. Those are important, and we do support those kind of events, flyovers. So, but they have to be vetted through the appropriate channels. So as long as those get approved through the appropriate public affairs channels, and then they come out on a list, we do try to look at those and see if there's any that are nearby that basically fit into our schedule that we can go ahead and accommodate, because we do think it's important, and we'll continue to try to engage with the community and represent the proud Guard that we are. So thanks, sir.
Thanks, Dave. What are the plans for the Guard moving forward regarding support of COVID-19 efforts? As I mentioned briefly before, we're going to continue our response based on the ask from the governor. And we do remain integrated with the state staff, within the state EOC, working with the Department of Health, the food bank, and we retain still a lot of capability, whether it's food distribution or doing testing, or in the case of the Essex site. So we've broken that site down. It's modular, 4x8 construction, and that is currently in storage here at Camp Johnson. So again, if there's a surge or a need, we can very quickly stand that back up, and that was by design. So we'll be ready. How many noise complaints have you gotten from community members about the F-35s? Do you publish these numbers on your website? So that's a great question. So option 3, if you dial 338-3000, that will get you to our switchboard. I don't have a good answer for it. I don't know how many we've gotten, but our public affairs officer is in a better position to answer that question for you. So what kind of things can Vermonters do to support deploying soldiers and their families? Well, I think, one, you're asking the question, and then that's a great start. We ask a lot of our soldiers and our airmen. And during times of deployment, as noted, and having experienced it myself, it can be fairly stressful for a family. So being there and probably just having a candid conversation and asking those families what they need, if anything. Sometimes it's simply just engaging and talking to folks and learning about the Guard and what it is that they need and why they serve. And that's a great question, because nothing that we do in this organization, we can't do it without families, without family support, without employer support. All that's critical to our success as an organization and anything that we do. So, great question. I think, Dave, do you have anything that you want to add?
Sure. One thing unique to the Guard versus our active duty counterparts is we live and work in the communities. So with that, it's a bit of a challenge because our families aren't all in one location. So they're in disparate locations throughout the state. So if you have a neighbor who has a soldier or an airman who's deploying, throughout that deployment, check in, see what that family needs, see what you can do to help them out, and if nothing else, that moral support will pay huge dividends and really help that family through the deployment.
Thanks, Dave. Will student soldiers be required to deploy, or will they be allowed to opt out of the upcoming 12-month spring deployment so their education is not disrupted? Well, that's a good question. So we have a policy right now for the first 2 years of your enlistment. If you're a college student, you can opt out. It's a college first agreement with the member who's joined the Guard. After that 2 years, that will be up to the unit and the chain of command to work that out with their soldier. We do have to take into consideration there's an operational need. There are a lot of folks that look forward to a deployment. They value the experience. They get to go overseas and make a difference. But I think we all understand the challenges that are presented by somebody who's a full-time student. And putting your education on hold is really that's kind of a big deal. But we'll work with you. The chain of command work with you. But the short answer is, at least, unless there's something I'm missing, it's
Yeah,
a 2 year.
if I could add to that, please, Greg. So, College First option came into effect October 1st of 2019. And for those who enlisted from that point forward, if you enlisted and signed up for that College First option, you had to do so as part of that enlistment process. Anyone wishing to quote the question here, opt out of the deployment, there is a process for that. It's called a hardship board. If you have a hardship that you think should get you out of what is involuntary deployment, you talk with your chain of command first, find out the process, find out when those boards are going to meet, and find out what you need to submit to those boards. And we will, starting in July, be holding on a monthly basis hardship boards, and that will be in sequence to the timeline for when those units are deploying. So first, check with your chain of command. Second, find out what you need to submit for paperwork. And then third, it's really on the individual soldier to ensure they get their paperwork submitted on time so that their packet can get to that hardship board. That hardship board will meet, make a decision, and then we go forward from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Can you recount a list of the ways the Vermont Guard has responded to the COVID-19 pandemic? I know it's a long list. Thank you. So a lot of things I mentioned up front, the ongoing testing with the pop-up sites, with our medical company and our 15th Civil Support Team. That's ongoing. That's an ongoing mission for us. Again, food distribution, we'll be back on track with that next week, working with Vermont Food Bank. So long as there is a need, we'll continue doing that. The Strategic National Stockpile Warehouse, those operations continue with our Air Guard folks, helping with the logistics and the mechanics of making that a smooth operation. There's, and again, the Essex facility and other pop-up facilities as needed. We stand ready to help stand up other alternate care facilities as we've done throughout the state at the onset of this pandemic. But one thing that I think folks don't see, there's a lot of folks that work in the background to get us ready to do that. Whether it's training, it's our Director of Military Support, and a lot of the planners we have integrated within the state EOC and with the Department of Health, and all of that feeds the communication up. So those are the folks that work in the background. Our U.S. Purchasing and Fiscal Office, those are the folks that really keep us honest and out of trouble when it comes to getting money in Vermont and spending it properly, not violating the purpose for which we're receiving it. And there are very specific parameters within fiscal law that we have to abide by. And those folks, and General Manfredi is certainly central to this, is facilitating, for instance, and you see this across the nation, putting our soldiers and airmen on Title 32 orders as opposed to state active duty. It comes with different benefits, and the funding stream is vastly different. So if it's a Title 32 order, it's federal money, not state money. If it's state active duty, it's state money. So having folks on Title 32 orders provide additional benefits inclusive of TRICARE and a lot of the benefits that come with being on orders under federal authority working for the state. So good question.
If I could add just a little bit to that,
Yes.
please, Greg. So you alluded to planners in the background who really help out. One of the critical things that we did, we put some of our senior logistical personnel, both Air and Army, we integrated them with the Department of Health and the State Emergency Operations Center. And they established from nothing a medical logistics system which monitors our levels of PPE and other equipment that is staged at the Strategic National Stockpile Warehouse and put a process in place to monitor the levels of inventory that we have there, procure what we need to procure to keep our hospitals and our individual providers operating. Again, behind the scenes, but one of the key things that we did that really helped the state respond to this COVID-19. A lot of what our airmen and our soldiers are doing is really also helping the governor reopen the economy here. When we get outbreaks, as we saw in Winooski recently, the testing that we do really is a big help to trace those down and hopefully contain them so that we can go on opening our economy.
Thanks, Dave. Is it true both federal and state college tuition and certification reimbursement is available to those who join the Vermont National Guard? So, if a soldier or airman joins the Guard, they are, in most instances, eligible for federal tuition assistance. So they are able to use the federal tuition assistance. They are able to use the Vermont National Guard educational assistance funding, and with that, they can go to a state college, inclusive of UVM, tuition free, at the in-state rate, and then on the private institutions, they will be reimbursed at the Northern Vermont University tuition rate. So I think in conjunction, and this is a question that recruiters can probably answer a little more depth than I can. There are some subtleties with federal tuition assistance and state tuition assistance, but in the end, they'll work with you. Our educational services officer works with soldiers and airmen to make sure that their tuition gets paid, and sometimes that's a hybrid of approach by using both. What other benefits are on the table for a new enlistee to the Vermont National Guard in addition to the tuition reimbursement? So, as General Manfredi mentioned, certainly in the Army side, there are 15 military occupational specialties that come with a $20,000 enlistment bonus. That's a pretty significant incentive for a part-time job. Once a person joins the Guard, for instance, a single person, an airman or a soldier is eligible for TRICARE healthcare, which is a really good program in that for a single soldier or airman is about $52 a month. Dental care, I think, is about $27 a month. That's inclusive of x-rays and 2 checkups a year, 2 cleanings. And then life insurance, likewise, I think is still less than $30 for $400,000 of term life. There's some subtleties to joining that folks sometimes don't consider. Depending on your specialty or your Air Force specialty code, you will likely be assigned a security clearance at some level. So something you have to look at is what's that worth to an employer on the outside. So as a part-time job, you're receiving that ancillary benefit as well as the training and resume building that goes with it. So to your point about certifications, that's something that I don't know that we publicize as well as we could. There's a crosswalk of certifications on specialties that you earn in the Guard that will crosswalk into a civilian certification. And I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but I can tell you that if for instance, you go to school to become a combat medic on the Army National Guard side, you come back to Vermont and that translates into an EMTB, or basic. And then by extension, if you become a flight medic, you will go to 10 months of training at Fort Sam Houston in Texas, and you come back, you are certified as a paramedic in Vermont. But there's a number of certifications that will crosswalk, and that again is another one of those hidden benefits. So good question, thanks.
If I could add one thing to that,
Yes,
please,
Dave.
Greg. So I think there's a perception out there that you have to serve 20 years in the military in order to get a retirement. No, that's no longer the case. The military now has, and this is for both Air and Army, blended retirement system. So from day one, you can start contributing to a 401k-like investment vehicle. And there's a match on the part of the Army and the Air Force that goes along with it. And after you vest, you walk away with that when you leave the Army, whether it's after just a few years or you stay a full 20 years. If you do stay a full 20 years, there is a percentage of your base pay that is matching, or that goes in addition to that investment vehicle.
That's a great point. And one other thing I forgot to mention on the topic of benefits. So if you're a college student and you've graduated and upon graduation, you brought with you college debt. You can join, I'm not sure on the Air National Guard side, but I can certainly speak to the Army National Guard side. We have an officer candidate school enlistment option. So you will join the Guard, you'll go to basic training, and then you'll come back to basic training and you'll do officer candidate school, which is a 3-phase program, which is what I did. I did fast track because I was old. I had to go fast, so I did mine in 9 weeks, but it's a parallel program. Phase 1 is 2 weeks. You'll do about 14 months of drill weekends here in Vermont. And then phase 3 is an annual training. I think they've been doing that at Fort McClellan, Alabama.
That's one of the locations.
Yes. Multiple locations. But in the end, you'll earn your commission in the Vermont Army National Guard, and upon commissioning, that comes with a $50,000 student loan repayment. So that's out there. In addition to that, it's a competitive market, and we're subject to the same population. We're all trying to recruit the same people. So if I look at the what we call the professional branches, the doctors, the attorneys, the chaplains, our nurses, a lot of those come with significant incentives. So if for instance, you're a doctor or a resident, you can, upon signing up with the Guard, you are eligible for up to $250,000 in student loan repayment. And inclusive in that would be an annual, for one's a sign-on bonus, and then I think 25 or 35,000. We can do a little research on that. Annual bonus, in addition to that, kind of a retention bonus to keep you in the Guard. So for me, that's a pretty significant incentive. I understand that doctors, for instance, you graduate and a lot of them are carrying significant amount of debt. Our way to incentivize that is to try to relieve some of that in exchange for their service. During COVID-19, can you explain why the Air Guard still flew jets daily opposed to assisting in state active duty? Is it due to the federal mission versus state mission? Colonel Shevchik, you want to take that?
Absolutely, sir. Yeah, I appreciate the question. This is one where exactly it is due to the federal and the state, and they're not mutually exclusive. And I think that's important to emphasize is we can do both. We have been doing both. We'll continue to do both. So we've been continuing to fly during COVID-19 because we have an obligation and responsibility to meet our federal mission requirements. But we've also been able to balance those and still meet all of our state operational demands or needs. Working and serving in whatever capacity the governor needs us, both on the Army and the air side. And we will continue to do that. So it is a federal and state, and is not one or the other. It is how we do them collectively together as a team, and we've been very successful at it, and we'll continue to do so because we enjoy serving the state and the nation.
Great, thanks, Dave.
Sir.
Where do the prepackaged meals that were given out across the state come from, and how much does one of those boxes cost? So many of those, it depends on which ones we're talking about. Initially, they were the FEMA meals ready to eat. I don't know where they came from. I'm presuming they came from a national stockpile. They were certainly brought here, and our role was to facilitate distribution with the Vermont Food Bank. That graduated in turn to fresh produce and dairy products from a lot of local farmers. So kind of the farm to table approach, and that's been a very welcome addition. So it's not just a shelf stable meal ready to eat. We're actually getting vegetables and dairy products, milk and cheese from a lot of local distributors, local farmers out to Vermonters. But as to the cost, I don't know. I can't speak. We can probably do a little research. If we want to send a note to our public affairs officer, we could probably get an answer for you. I just don't know off the top of my head.
I could add a little bit of detail to that, Greg. So you're absolutely right. FEMA provided the FEMA MREs and those other prepackaged meals that initially came to us. They were shipped from FEMA warehouses to a regional distribution point down in Massachusetts, and shipped from that regional distribution point up here to one of our armories and distributed from there. All of our efforts along this line of effort were in support of the Vermont Food Bank, and the USDA has been paying for the fresh food. Actually, it's not a FEMA led mission. It's USDA trying to keep farmers employed, and they're paying for that fresh food through the Abbey Group and then distributed through Agency of Transportation, Vermont Food Bank, and Vermont National Guard personnel at our distribution sites.
Thanks, Dave. I have an ALC slot at Fort Hood in August. With the new rise of COVID-19 in Texas, will I miss this chance? So ALC is another one of those professional military education. It's the next step. It's the advanced leader course for our non-commissioned officers, and it's part of our continuing education. So the short answer is, I don't know. This is all a new one on us. If ALC or the senior leader course, any of our professional military education courses, the military and the Army is becoming more adaptable, and I think they're realizing that this is a long haul. So they're going to have to adapt to the virtual construct to the best we can, and still provide valuable training and education to our soldiers. So that's a good question. We'll make sure we write that one down, and I'll get with our operations folks who manage our school accounts, and we'll check with Training and Doctrine Command and see if we can get an eye on what exactly the plan is, and if it's going to go virtual. I think we have to. We can't stop training. We can't stop educating. So we have to find a way around it. But good question. Thank you.
If I can add to that, please, Greg. So Department of Defense has established what they're calling green locations. Vermont is a green location. All but 3 of the 50 states are currently green. I'm not sure if Texas is one of the 3. That is, I think it's Florida, Texas, and maybe California, but don't quote me on
We've got a
that.
spike in Arizona now too.
But as states and locations throughout the world reach a certain CDC established criteria, the Department of Defense identifies them as green. And what that means is you can travel without an exception to policy as long as the school is being run by Fort Hood. If the school is being run by Fort Hood in August for you, and Texas is not a green state yet, what you can do is, through your chain of command, ask for an exception to policy. We have the ability here in the state to approve that travel exception to policy. So again, just like with most things in the military, stay in touch with your chain of command. Make sure you're tracking through your readiness NCO or your training NCO on the status of that school. And if there's a requirement for an exception to policy, our operations shop is well versed in that process, and we can get it through in a matter of a day. So it's a very quick process.
So is the Vermont National Guard planning on testing its soldiers and airmen? We'll come back to that one. Sorry I missed a question. So we've been very fortunate as an organization. We got ahead of this early on. It started with the wing, kind of knowing the direction of things and following the governor's guidance. We very quickly transitioned where we could to teleworking, immediately implemented social distancing, mask policy. So all of that, I think, was central to keeping the Guard healthy and our families, certainly by extension. So as far as testing, we do that on a case-by-case basis. If for instance, a soldier or airman comes back from a training, from a trip someplace, and they come back and they've been in contact, we do our own contact tracing, and they'll quarantine and they will be given a test, and they can participate in the pop-up sites just like anybody else. Do we have anything to add to that, Dave?
But everything you said is absolutely right. From a practical perspective, if you think about the size of the Army, which is over 1 million soldiers, just one of the branches of the military, to test everyone, and the frequency with which you would have to do that makes it virtually impossible to do that. So the guidance we have from the Department of Defense is to do exactly what General Knight just said, and that is, on an as-needed basis, we'll test individuals who are either exposed to someone who's COVID positive or showing symptoms of being COVID positive. And we do that through the Department of Health pop-up sites here in Vermont.
Correct. Let's go back to the other question that I missed. What does the Vermont Air National Guard do to mitigate F-35 sound to the community? Dave, I know you talked about it briefly up front. It comes down to how we actually fly the jet.
Absolutely, sir, because we take pride in being good stewards of the community. We have been and will continue to be, because we live and serve within this community. So we do a number of things to mitigate the sound to the community. I'll just highlight a few of them. As you mentioned in your opening statement, sir, we take off and land kind of mid-morning, mid-afternoon. So not too early, not too late, to try to be sensitive to kind of balance our mission and training requirements with consideration for the community. If we are going to night fly, we do some sort of a public service announcement to let folks know. Other things we do is we adhere to strict noise abatement procedures. So that includes not taking off an afterburner as well. So we've had up to this point to date one afterburner takeoff. So that's well below the 5% as outlined in the EIS. And then the other things we do on the recovery, we've actually raised the traffic pattern by 500 feet, and we also recover to the highest altitude possible based upon whatever the weather allows. And what that essentially means is when we enter the local area, we do it from as high as possible to have the least amount of impact to our community to mitigate the noise. And then lastly, we've instituted a one to a full stop policy, which essentially means we don't do any of our local training here unless emergency or safety dictates. For whatever reason, we do all of our training away from Burlington. So when you see the jets here, they're just going to land, and that's it.
Okay,
Thanks, sir.
great, thanks, Dave. Due to COVID, are we, both Army and Air, looking at trying to expand distance learning? Is it an option to hold courses like we did in the past? Well, that's kind of a do-out for, I think, the military as a whole, and certainly us as a Guard. So I would use the basic leader course as an example of our ability to adapt and still provide that valuable training and education to soldiers so they can continue to progress in their careers. So we do that, I think, just about every level. If I look on the officer side, we have the intermediate level education, the advanced operations course. Even our senior service colleges were forced to do a distributed learning environment. So we've certainly become better at it, and I think this is going to, COVID-19 is going to be a forcing function for us. We're going to have to continue to do that until we get to the backside of it. Don't know if, my hope is that we return to resident training, because I think there are some things you simply can't replicate online. It's good as an interim measure. In the end, we may end up having some type of hybrid, as General Manfredi said. You know, we'll be looking at going to green states as things start to open up. And again, we've got to be cognizant of not everything's going to stay open. So as the earlier question pointed out, you know, have some challenges coming up in Texas. Some of the other states may see similar spikes. We just got to maintain our awareness there. But we're going to keep working on it. General Knight, earlier you spoke of racial diversity forums. Can you run down when they will be and if they'll be in person or online based on the current guidance from Governor Scott? So July 1st, we've got one over at the Air National Guard in the Wing Conference Room, or the Wing Auditorium. And on the 8th of July, we'll be in Northfield at the Regional Readiness Training Center. So what we've done there, we've limited attendance, so people can call in. We've established a call-in, either it's Teams or a WebEx, but we have call-in capability. So we've worked through that piece of it, and we've limited it to 25 folks attending in person, so we can maintain the social distancing and continue to have the conversation. Any other questions? What will the Guard do if there is a surge of COVID-19 cases in Vermont? Well, as I said before, we're going to maintain our readiness. We're not taking our eye off this thing, and neither is the governor or the state staff or the cabinet. This is a long haul. So we'll retain our readiness. We'll keep our planners in place and be ready to surge if needed. We have sufficient resources, personnel resources available to do that, and we'll continue to work with the Department of Emergency Management, Director Borneman, Agency of Health and Human Services, you know, Dr. Levine, and certainly the governor's staff to keep an eye on things. And my hope is that what we're doing now continues to be effective. We continue to drive this thing down. But that being said, we're not naive. We don't know the direction this is going to go. We're going to maintain our response capability.
If I could add just a little bit to that, Greg.
Sure.
So we, at the senior level here at the Guard, stay in 3-day-a-week teleconferences with the governor and his staff. And from what we've observed, they're doing a very good job monitoring all of the things that would indicate to us that there's a need for us to help out if there's any type of surge in COVID cases like we've seen in some of the other states throughout the country. The SCOC, the State Emergency Operations Center, led by Director Borneman and the Vermont Emergency Management, is kind of the hub for all those tactical type of operations. And we have what's called a Director of Military Support, and he and his staff are tied in at the hip with the State Emergency Operations Center, and that allows us to get ahead of things and anticipate any type of need for the Vermont National Guard to support any state agency in their response. So we'll be able to lean forward, and we'll be ready to support if the state needs us.
Thanks, Dave. Why should I join the Guard instead of the active duty military? Well, it depends on what you're looking for in a career. As I mentioned earlier, the training is the same. Basic training is the same. Air, Army, your tech schools, your MOS, your military occupational specialty producing schools are the same. So when you go to training, you're integrated with active duty, new active duty soldiers. You're integrated with Army reservists. Depends on what your career aspirations are. But one question I would ask when you're looking at a career, would you buy a car before you test drove it? Folks don't understand this is not an all or nothing proposition for somebody who wants to join the military and serve. And it's not for everybody. So in my case, I joined, I did active duty for 6 years, and then I was a traditional Guard airman and a soldier for 7 years, 11 years before I actually came back on the full-time side because I just missed it. That was my career aspiration. That's what I wanted to do. But what folks don't understand, you don't have to join the Guard and stay Guard. So if you join the Guard and you do a term of service and you really like what you're doing and you want to do it for a career and you want to do it full-time, we're not going to get in your way. We're going to give you the training. We're going to create the opportunities for you. But you do a year with us, that's what you want to do, then you find an active duty recruiter, and it's basically a paperwork drill, and we transfer you to active duty. So just a lot of opportunity, and the best way to do it is by asking the question and do your homework. That's important.
May I add 2 things to that, please,
Yes.
Greg? So if you want to stay here in Vermont but serve, the Guard is the way to do that. It's an opportunity for you to stay here, live in your community, work in your community, and serve part-time in a military organization. The second thing I would add is the one thing that the active component does not have that makes the Guard does have and makes it unique is the tuition benefit that General Knight talked about earlier. That tuition benefit separates us from a benefits perspective versus our active duty counterparts, and allows our soldiers and airmen to go tuition free to our state schools and reimbursed up to a certain point at our private colleges here as well. 2 big benefits to staying here in Vermont and serving the Guard.
Thanks, Dave. So why is the new Provost Marshal position important? So I did a lot of research on this, and when I was campaigning for this job, I realized the value that a Provost Marshal and a deputy could bring to the organization, because it addresses a niche that I don't think we've had addressed sufficiently in the past, not as long as I've been a part of this organization. Other states have a Provost Marshal position, but the focus is force protection, threat assessments, background checks, and things like that. Our approach is a little bit different. By having it joint, having an Air or Army, one of each in that position, that will give us the liaison capability with civil authority, and that's important. Meaning law enforcement. That's important because we don't have that right now. We have a great relationship, but there's not a habitual linkage. So internal to the organization, as I mentioned before, it has the potential to serve as a compliance team. Helps with policy enforcement, helps with reporting, as detailed in what I hope is now law. I believe the governor signed it. Reporting on sexual assaults in Vermont and functioning as a deterrent. So when needed, I think it's important to understand what we had prior, and we still have it. When you're doing investigations, whether it's in the Air National Guard or Army National Guard, we can do internal investigations. We can do command-directed investigations. But the result of that, if there are penalties forthcoming for somebody who's violated regulation, those are largely administrative actions. And sometimes they're just very long in coming. It's a very cumbersome process by design. But at some point, and we've seen it, you may run into a case where the complexity of an investigation may bleed over into criminal activity by somebody in the Guard. If we know that, we have to be able to refer that to civil authority. But by having somebody certified as a law enforcement officer in Vermont, building those habitual relationships, having the ability to provide a supplemental affidavit, for instance. I just think that provides us a deterrent effect to get to the end state, which is to make the organization better. So for any of us, what's the best experience you've had in uniform? Well, I will tell you my perspective. I don't know. I've had great jobs and I've had jobs that they weren't so great. But on July 11th, I will have been in the military in some shape or form, either full-time or part-time, for 37 years. And I would tell you that by far it was the smartest decision of my life, career-wise. I made some other pretty good decisions, but that one was important to me. I didn't have a whole lot of direction. I did 13 years enlisted. I went through officer candidate school, which was extremely challenging. I lost 22 pounds in 9 weeks. It was hard. I probably should go back. But in the end, it's just been, this entire journey has been an incredible experience for me. Some of the jobs, surprisingly enough, that I found the most enjoyable, the ones that were the most challenging. Being a recruiting commander was very challenging because you're under the gun. It's a very production-driven job. But to me, the most rewarding was probably my deployment to Iraq. That was by far the most focused and mission-specific I've ever been in my life. And to go there and not the best of conditions and know that Vermonters made a difference, that was pretty profound for me. Dave, what do you think?
So I don't know that I could relate any one experience that is my best experience, but I would say that if I were to look at the different pieces and parts of my career, had the good fortune to serve on active duty for a few years. Then I came into the Guard. I've served in the Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Vermont Guard. I've deployed twice with the Vermont Guard. I've been very involved with our COVID-19 response. And what's common to all of that in the Guard, and this is what I would call my best experience, is seeing soldiers and airmen in the Guard and the genuine care that they have for their mission. And that results in absolutely an absolutely incredible amount of effort that goes into what they do, and the results that they deliver is, I think, what sets us apart from our active duty counterparts. And that to me is very humbling, and that's been the best thing that I've seen in my career.
Dave, what do you think?
Absolutely, sir. I would definitely agree. I mean, as a native Vermonter, I think probably the best, a little bit biased after having served about 10 years on active duty and now 10 years here in the Guard. To pinpoint just one experience, I think part of the best experience is that you get multiple experiences. And as you mentioned, like multiple jobs and the relationships and the people that you meet, and then just getting to witness now, come back to this home state and to serve alongside the airmen. And it gives me goosebumps talking about it, just to see their dedication and commitment, even going through, you know, this crisis that we've endured here as a nation, but in the state of Vermont, to walk in and serve alongside and see that the alternate healthcare facility being built, or you know, doing what you all did too, to get to see the food distribution. When you're there and seeing and being part of that, there's nothing like it. You can't
Seeing
put
that
words to
alternate
it.
healthcare facility go up was humbling. It
So
was
very
amazing to
humbling.
see
So
that.
so proud of the team, and that just getting to witness and be a part of that, very humbling, and definitely a highlight.
All right, thanks, Dave. So, listen, everybody, I really appreciate you. For those of you that were logged in with us tonight, it's really outstanding. We'll see how the format goes, but we're going to continue this. Look forward to seeing you, you know, in the next couple of months. If you have any questions, we're here. Come visit us. You know, we're open for business within reason, given our current COVID-19 situation. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them. We really want to tell you about our Guard. We're proud of what we do, and we're looking for really good people to come work with us. Tough business right now. We need good people, and if we don't have people, we can't continue to do what we do. So thank you for listening. I